Inclusion. You said, we haven't really dug into inclusion a little bit. And I don't, yeah, boy, we're gonna, I don't know how much time we have this afternoon, Rami, but we could go long on this. But I am curious about the inclusion thing. You and I have had off camera conversations about the polarity of American, socio-political affairs right now. What do they say? Two things you never talk about at work: religion and politics. It's sort of unavoidable right now. You talked about how Arcellx is a melting pot of religious beliefs. How do you manage that? Like, how does that relate to inclusion? First of all, like maybe share with us what inclusion means to you, and then share with us a little bit of how you manage for inclusion, perhaps.
Sure, yeah. Like I think inclusion, and the reason I bring it up is that it is one of the things I feel like is not talked about enough. There's such a focus on diversity, but putting a bunch of diverse people into a company where they don't feel like they can, they're part of the fabric of the organization, they can ascend and grow, that they can be who they are and bring themselves, their whole selves to work, is not really that effective. So one of the pieces of research I cite in my talk is that there's one particular organization where, somewhere around 40% of the entry-level workforce was female, but only like 20% or so of the top layers of the organization were female. And why is there that drop off? And one of the theses that was tested there was that, women opt out, or their behavior or whatnot kind of drives that differential. But upon research and inspection, it turns out that the behaviors of women, from participating in meetings, from who they spoke to, for how they communicated, where they communicated, all those kind of things, were equivalent to men. And so really it was the bias that was holding them back from advancing, not their behavior or their performance. And so I think that's where inclusion is really critical. It's not just enough that you have diverse people, but you have to have an environment where those diverse people can do what they do every day. So that's a little bit different than I think the question you're asking. The point I was trying to make was that if you don't, and the best way to drive inclusion is to really have a diverse management team where people have a seat at the ultimate table. Because what I see a lot when I get calls from organizations to help with diversity, it's help us. And I'll go on their website and look at their management team. And what you said earlier, the whole management team is middle-aged white guys. Mm-hmm. And so how are you expected to foster an environment where a diverse group of people can grow if you don't have that representation right at the top, that inclusion right at the top? Like it's unlikely that group of people is going to come up with a great maternity policy, to be honest, right? It's just unlikely. It's unlikely. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. It's unlikely that their programs or health insurance, all these different things are going to be responsive to an increasingly diverse workforce. And I think that's what's challenging, is that it's just, and it reinforces the point we just talked about. It's just not a light switch. It's not something you can just do in isolation. You have to be committed to it. And the only way to be committed to the very first question you asked is to actually believe it. And you believe that through experience, through research, right? That reinforces that this is something really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, we're going long here. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Discussion? Yeah. All right. Good stuff. We've also acknowledged that the DEI concept has fallen out of favor with some, was never in favor for some, and you don't do business in a vacuum. You contract with outsourced, perhaps outsourced manufacturers, development people, suppliers, big pharma. Where, like, I guess the question would be, if you were going to we'll frame it this way: if you were going to give advice to someone who, wanted to embrace this commitment, recognizes the value, and is ready to take the next step, but you had perhaps a warning, not a warning like, hey, to dissuade, but a warning like, hey, you're going to take some incoming, right? There might be some incoming here. You might create some friction or challenge for yourself in some relationship with a shareholder, as I said, supplier, outsourced manufacturer, whatever it might be. Have you seen any of that, and what advice might you offer to prepare for and perhaps mitigate any of that friction that you might encounter?
Yeah, I mean, I think on DEI, it's a bit too soon. I know that like that word has been weaponized, for lack of a better term, of late. And I don't know that I've seen kind of the fallout from it yet to say that I've seen, aside from obviously it was used to help oust some university presidents or in conjunction with that. But I haven't seen it practically, certainly in biotech or more broadly. I do think, yeah, that probably if you were inclined to say you listened to this podcast or read something and you're like, hey, I really believe in this, I want to enact it, you probably are thinking, yeah, well, this has become a bit more of an explosive word, and should I be worried? I'm not sure there's much to worry about there. I think that it's been more in high stakes politics than in sort of the day-to-day life of what we deal with in terms of what we do. I would also say that it is increasingly clear that from an ESG perspective, that shareholders do care about diversity. It's something that is getting more and more attention over time. So I would sort of ignore the bluster of what is happening in this moment in time and focus on the fact that, again, it is a competitive advantage. It is the right thing to do. And I think it's with the grain of where, companies are going and where funds and shareholders are going to care, even if at this moment in time, it's a little bit challenged. And I'm a big fan of doing the right thing, over the arc of the long term, even if it's a bit unpopular at any point in time.
Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, I mean, I interview a lot of leaders of biotech, hundreds and hundreds so far, hundreds and hundreds to go. And I take a lot of pitches, right, from PR and communications agencies. And the first thing that I do when I receive a pitch is I go to the company's website. One, I determine that they're a fit from a product and technology standpoint. And then two, my friend Alan Shaw, who's a frequent guest on the show, always talks about betting on jockeys, not horses. So I go look at the jockeys. I go to the About Us, the leader profile page, and it's anecdotal. I don't sit there with a tick sheet, but in biotech and in small biotech, there are a lot of companies that are as vanilla as they possibly could be. If some of those leaders were exposed to this concept in a meaningful way and warmed up to the concept, warmed up to the idea, but perhaps lacked the conviction that you were more or less born with, or the education that you've acquired along the way that many of us have, where would be a good starting point? I mean, we'll start with you. Maybe we'll point to your TED Talk first.
Yeah, that's a good starting point.
Is that still available, like on YouTube? Can people?
Yes, it's on YouTube and it's on TED.com. So you can easily, if you Google me and TED Talk, you'll find it. So that is a good starting point, not just because I gave it, but because it is very heavily referenced and it covers sort of the gamut of like why this is important professionally and what's the underlying science too, that even if you have kids or have children, that's important. But I would say besides the inclusion point we touched on, the other really important point in that talk is that it's important to actually address both men and women when talking about this topic. I think there's an intrinsic sort of bias or belief that this is a male issue, that we have to overcome the biases on our male friends and colleagues. But I can't tell you how many times I've given that talk to a live audience and the gasps you hear from women at certain parts in the talk, because they themselves don't appreciate how much this bias has infiltrated their thinking and their viewpoint on certain issues. And so I think and maybe that's a good point to make, which is that if you particularly are a male leader and you feel like this is a topic that is important, besides watching a TED Talk, is engage with some colleagues, particularly female colleagues, and say, hey, I'm interested in learning more. I want to hear more about your experience and what that's been like. And maybe we can, from that experience, start to make some steps, right? Address some of these things so other women don't have to face. I'm focusing on gender equity, but obviously this is broadly true of diversity as well.
Yeah.
But I think just starting dialogues lead to connections, connections lead to bigger networks of support, bigger education, and ultimately enough conviction to make a difference.
Yeah. Very good. What on this top specific to this topic, DEI, what haven't I asked you that perhaps I should have, or what have I, maybe glossed over that you'd like to hit on?
Well, that's a good question. I feel like we covered a lot. I would say that maybe one thought is that it's hard to do this if you're not authentic. Like it's hard to. I like the actual. Although I didn't see it coming, but it was a very great intro that you had, and the diversity washing, as you called it. I hadn't heard that term before. But it's hard to do this if you're disingenuous, and it's a little bit, to use my electrical engineering degree here, it's a bit binary, right? Like you can't be sort of halfway a little bit. It's like you either really believe this is important and you're going to kind of follow through on it from a diversity perspective, from an inclusion perspective, from holding the bar high across the board and making sure that you are committed. And you're going to be authentic to yourself. I think we talked about this before. I'm the kind of person where this isn't the only topic I talk about. I tend to talk, I talk about everything from abortion to Palestine to Black Lives Matter to, I think you have to be yourself. Like you have to be authentic. You have to believe in what you believe in. And people will really, I don't like using the word follow, but it certainly resonates with people. And even if you don't have the same point of view on something, that's okay. Like it's important to be respectful. It's important to say, I respect that you can have a different opinion from me on this topic, even if it's a really emotional and controversial or challenging topic. That's okay because, there was a song way back when I was in high school where there was this monologue. It was perfect because it was like graduation year, and there was this monologue where this guy was kind of giving life lessons to the background of this music. And one of the things that always stuck me was that something along the lines of like life is a race, but you're only racing against yourself. Just because someone doesn't agree with you today doesn't mean they may not see your point of view tomorrow, or you may not see their point of view tomorrow, right? So I think people need to, if there's anything I've learned, is that you need to give yourself grace and give other people grace. Sometimes it's okay if someone takes a little bit longer to maybe appreciate your point of view, or you take a little bit longer and rethink it, appreciate their point of view. But time is a magical thing and something that not enough people take advantage of. Might be to get a better candidate, but it also might be to learn a more valuable lesson or perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very sound. I think I remember that song that you're referencing.
I don't look remember it
up. I don't remember the artist or the title, but I'm hearing it in my head as you're talking. All right, that's fantastic. I've really appreciated this conversation. I mean, I think it's super insightful, very enlightening. Appreciate your perspectives. It's interesting, if you're a listener and you're at this point in the podcast listening and you're like, yeah, but what about Arcellx? I didn't hear like the next steps for the pipeline. I just a disclaimer, Rami told me in a previous conversation, it's okay if we don't commercial, they make this a commercial for Arcellx. And this, the company, the profile of the company is such that if you're really interested in that, you can spend 20 minutes on Google and you're going to have a whole bunch of information. But I do want to touch on that real quick before we wrap things up here, Rami. I am interested in what, from a leadership perspective, is your kind of next highest priority at Arcellx.
Sure. Yeah. Look, we're at an incredible point in time here where I feel like we've obviously accomplished a lot to what you shared earlier, Matt, but we have so much road ahead of us. So we're in the middle of running our phase 2 pivotal study in multiple myeloma. And so we're excited about that study and its potential. And we've guided to being on the market in 2026. And so that's something that, as we gear up over the next couple of years here, it's going to be a really fun ride scaling this organization for commercialization and ultimately delivering this therapy more broadly at scale. And so that's kind of the high level on the lead program. There are other studies and earlier lines and all sorts of things that we're working on. But for the teaser for your audience, if you will, is that. And then obviously we're also equally excited about our pipeline. We have a really differentiated technology, which we didn't get into for the reasons that you and I mentioned, which is that we're very passionate about talking about other things. But people can certainly read up on that. And we have a study in AML that's in phase 1 right now. We're excited about and hoping to bring some solid tumor targets to the clinic in the next couple of years. So all in all, just super fun company to be a part of. We're always obviously growing and recruiting. So if I'll put a commercial for anything, is if you're interested in what you heard, look us up, and if there's a role, hit us up. And we're always, we've got a lot of amazing people here, a lot of wood to chop in the next couple of years to continue to build this company into what we believe can be the first scale profitable company in the cell therapy space, and certainly help a lot of people and save a lot of lives.
Awesome. If you're interested in getting in touch with Arcellx regarding employment, just do a right angle check on your exceptionalism before you apply. And to be honest, like I would love to have you back on the show another time to talk about a little bit more about what the company's doing. Though I strongly suspect that if we attempted to do that, we'd probably run down a rabbit hole around some sort of social issue anyway. So, but I would welcome you back. I know it's a lot to cover in an hour, and there's much more to be said. So hopefully someday down the road you'll be game for coming back on for a part 2. But in the meantime, again, insightful, instructive, inspiring. I appreciate the conversation, and I appreciate your transparency with our audience.
No, it's my pleasure, Matt, and I would love to come back on one condition, that we go down the rabbit hole for sure. I get a lot of opportunities to talk about Arcellx. It's much more fun talking about these very important and impactful things.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, well, you pick the rabbit hole and give me a date, and we'll run down it.
That sounds like a plan.
Thank you, Rami.
My pleasure.